Hello everyone and welcome to the live Q&A with me, Professor Michael Scott. It is the 14th of October. It's starting to get a little bit chilly in the air. Autumn is coming and I hope that you have been well, wrapped up well, and that everything is going well for you wherever you are in the world. As ever, tell us about where you are in the world listening this afternoon. We'd love to hear from where you are, and also kind of do think about asking your questions live on camera, and we'll try and pick them up as we go through, as well as, of course, sending in your questions, which is the lifeblood of this Q&A. You sending your questions through to michaelscottacademic@gmail.com or direct to the Facebook page. So we've been having some great questions coming in, and also a chance, I'm determined today to get on with some of those questions that have come in over previous weeks and that I haven't had a chance to get to. So don't worry if you've asked a question and I haven't got to it yet. Today may well be the day. But before we start that and the process of looking at new questions, first we have to reflect on some of the old ones. Yes, of course, the great questions you have been sending in that we have had a chance to answer over previous weeks, because yes, it is prize week, everyone, and that means that we are going to be looking at the questions that we've asked and answered, and picking the best one over the last little while, and that person wins a prize. Tracy's still in Wales. Hello, Tracy. Hello, Lorraine. Hello, Nassim. Hello, Debbie. Thank you so much indeed all for tuning in. So we've been looking through the list of questions that have been asked and answered over the last couple of weeks, and there is a clear winner this time. In fact, with two questions from the same person that have both kind of occupied the winning spot. Hello, Emma from cloudy Spain. Hello, Rosie. Hello, hello. So with a drum roll indeed, who is this person with two questions? Well, these were the questions that we managed to answer, and which kind of already got us all thinking, and actually kind of were fabulous in getting some visuals back onto the Q&A. And they were, this was the first one. What did the ancients say when you sneezed? Absolutely great question. We had some great fun thinking about that and what sneezing meant. And then the second question, which came from her students, is why does Odysseus look so fat and funny on the cup in the Ashmolean Museum? And if you remember, we were looking at the pictures of a very weird, fat, funny, corpulent Odysseus running around on a couple of different Boeotian vase figures, i.e. drinking cups from the 5th century BCE, with this whole kind of jokey satire drama play vibe to them, where they were kind of dressed up almost comedic in every way possible, turning a hero into a comedian. Raja, hello everyone, hello, hello. So both of those questions came from Rebecca Louise. So thank you very much to Rebecca Louise. You are our winner this week, this month of the prize draw, and your students as well. Hello, Bieber from East Yorkshire. So kind of now, how you're going to share your prize, Rebecca, if your students are also the ones asking the question, that is for you to decide. But on offer to you is a signed copy of Ancient Worlds, or indeed a signed copy of the Life in Ancient Greece Key Stage 2 book. So do let us know. Get in touch via email, michaelscottacademic@gmail.com, or through the Facebook page to let us to know which you would like of those, and we will get it out into the post to you. Thank you for your brilliant questions. Thank you all for your brilliant questions, as always. And we can jump in with a few now of your new ones. Hello, Laura. Hello, everyone. Hello, Sherry. How are you? Nice to see you all. Thank you so much indeed for tuning in. And we have had a new question from Sarah Scotty asking, what archaeological discoveries do you wish would be discovered? Oh, so kind of, I like this question indeed. Hello, Patricia. So Alexis is here as well. Yo, hello. Don't worry about being late at all. That is absolutely fine. Just so glad that you can take a bit of time in your day to enjoy and relax into the ancient world. So Sarah's been asking about what archaeological discoveries do you most wish would be discovered? This is interesting, isn't it? Kind of, what are the big unanswered questions that we would love to sort of uncover the answer to through discovering something hidden in the ground somewhere? Or what might be the kinds of things, the questions that we could ask? Or what might be just the people and the places that we want to stand in, where we know something really happened once upon a time, and we want to know that we are standing in that location, and yet we just don't absolutely know where it is. D, greetings. Hello from Northeast USA. Mark from Las Vegas. Brilliant. Thank you for taking your time out of the shiny lights of the casinos of Las Vegas to join in for this Q&A. Hello, Helen from Stratford-upon-Avon. How is Shakespeare these days? So kind of that's the question. What archaeological discoveries do you wish would be discovered. And, one of the most famous, I guess, kind of unanswered questions that we would love to know the answer to and perhaps discover the remnants of is, where is the tomb of Alexander the Great? Now, actually, this is, there we go. Alexis has just said the very thing. My God, our minds are aligned, Alexis. Alexander the Great's burial place, of course. So we know he was buried in Alexandria in Egypt, kind of after he died, and we know his tomb was there for a while, but then it all gets a bit foggy as you get into the early centuries AD. And it gets lost at some point and has disappeared. There's lots of great theories about where it might have gone, including some that make it out that the bones of St. Mark that were taken from Egypt and from Alexandria, brought back to Venice and are currently in St. Mark's in Venice, might actually be the bones of Alexander the Great. Now, there's lots of people have asked about this, actually. There's been a number of questions from different people over the past couple of weeks. I was trying to see where we are. Yeah, Mark Slay, I'd love to know what your thoughts are on the Alexander the Great tomb. Will it ever be found? Was it destroyed? Was it moved from Alexandria in the early centuries AD? So, Mark, we are answering your question, or trying to answer your question, although we just don't know the answer as yet. But if you do want to follow up on some of the great theories, then we also wanted to flag to you one of the podcasts that is available to you to listen to at the moment from History Hit, The Ancients, is actually on the lost tomb of Alexander the Great. So the History Hit obviously does huge and fantastic swathe of podcasts related to the ancient world, led by Tristan. And Tristan is chatting to Dr. Chris Naunton about the lost tomb of Alexander the Great. So you can see the link for that on the Facebook page. And if you want to follow up about the tomb of Alexander the Great in particular, Mark, Sarah, any others, Alexis is clearly a fan out there, then that is the place to go. So there's things like that. There's conundrums of things we know that would be absolutely extraordinary to have in our hands and be able to look at and hold, but have just got lost in the mists of time. You think it's under the stuff, Alexis, of your 10-year-old's bedroom floor. I think you might be right. Dawn, hello from Houston, Texas. Thank you so much indeed for tuning in. But there are other places, isn't it, that we would just love to know that we were standing in the location where something happened, something great happened. Tell us. Let us know what you think those moments might be. Where would you love to know? We know that something happened in antiquity, a great moment, thought, a meeting, an idea was born. We just don't know exactly where it happened. We'd love to have that precise detail to be able to then go and stand on the spot and think we are standing in the footsteps of great ideas and great moments. Or might be that actually what you want from the ancient world is just more about certain types of people and types of lifestyle. We constantly berate the fact that the ancient world comes to us so often through elite male voices and elite male viewpoints, right? We struggle and have to push the sources to give us the female viewpoint, for example, or the viewpoint from the middle and lower classes, or even from the class of slaves, of what they thought about life in antiquity. It'd be lovely to have that kind of evidence. It never, obviously it did exist. There were these people and they did have their viewpoints, but it never really got written down, transmitted, or memorialized in a way that could survive through to us today. But what if it could have done? And not exactly an archaeological discovery we can discover, but something we can certainly wish for. And the other thing that I constantly think about is obviously what we can discover archaeologically is dependent on the particular environmental conditions in particular parts of the world. So, in dry Egypt, for instance, in the dry sands of Egypt, we can and do get the survival of papyrus because it's so dry. Things don't rot in the same way that they do in boggy, wet England. So there you get the chance, because of the environmental conditions, for the survival of a whole type of evidence about the ancient world. Similarly, if you move up to modern-day Afghanistan and you start to think about places and on the ancient Silk Roads there, right? Thinking kind of about some of the major trading points between communities. Again, the dry conditions there have often allowed things to survive, like materials, cloths, fabric from clothes that people were buried in or buried with, that again allow us the survival and kind of the ability to handle and look at and analyse and know about whole aspects of the ancient world that if you are in, again, a wetter, boggier environment, they just don't survive in the same way. So kind of these are the sort of the imbalances as we go around the world, dependent on environmental conditions, of the sorts of things that survive, and that's the sorts of things that we can interrogate the ancient world about. And then, of course, there is the sadness of access, right? Kind of the access to parts of the world. We know stuff is there. We know it has survived in great quantities, but it's not actually possible because of current geopolitical conditions, whether that's because of politics, whether that's because of war, that's actually stopping us from being able safely and reliably to be able to travel there, to be able to investigate. That's one of the great sadnesses for me. And equally, where there is just these intellectual blind spots, where we just don't seem to have a community interest in the particular ancient history of a particular part of the world or of particular cultures. And one of the places that suffered from this for so long, of course, is the steppe. I'm thinking about the nomadic pastoralists, as we now call tribes. So those who didn't build great architecture and great cities because they were constantly on the move, but did have extraordinarily rich personal objects, personal adornment, objects that they held very precious to them and travelled with. And we're starting to see some of the exhibits, like at the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge, about this at the moment. Great things to be able to see extraordinary objects. But these have not traditionally been focus or of interest to kind of major archaeological investigations. So it's even worse that we know the stuff is there. We can go and have a look at it, but people just don't seem to be invested enough or willing to invest the money so often enough to be able to do it. So, Sarah, lots of different angles at which we can answer that question, but do shout if there are particular archaeological discoveries that you would like to see discovered, or that you would want to have the answer to, or particular parts of the world or types of evidence that you would want to see. There's been some discussion there, kind of thinking about the Knights Templar and Watch Out, and different places around the world that you would like to go and explore. So do keep those coming in. Sarah, thank you so much indeed for your question. Absolutely brilliant. We're going to come back to some of the things that are going on around the ancient world in a moment. But there's a couple of questions here we wanted to get to from previous weeks as well. So Mariam Zaidi has asked this question, which I think is an absolutely brilliant one. Was there a concept of fashion icon or style icon present in antiquity? If yes, who was considered as the most stylish person in antiquity? Now, that is an absolutely brilliant question, Mariam. Thank you so much. And it's also a really interesting one because the word fashion is not one that actually scholars of the ancient, at least Greek and Roman Mediterranean worlds, are particularly comfortable using. And I've been doing some work on this for kind of as part of a global history of fashion that's going to be published by Cambridge University Press, thinking about how the ancient world and the scholarship on ancient world, on clothing, on dress, and it's very happy using these types of terminologies, clothing, dress, really shy away from using the word fashion, whereas the study of later periods is much more comfortable with the use of the word fashion. And that comes down to, of course, how you define what fashion is and what makes fashion fashion, as opposed to just being clothing or dress or traditional styles of dress, etc. And often the reticence to use it in relation to the ancient world is to do with the fast turnover speed that you associate with the idea of fashion. New fashions coming up all the time and what they are motivated by, and that idea that you need a kind of almost like an industry behind the fashion industry that's telling people kind of what is fashionable and what is not. I'm a little bit more sceptical about the fact that we can't use this term. I think we can use this term because I think we can definitively see trends in clothing and dress within the ancient Greek and Roman worlds, which I would quantify as a statement of fashion, or at least of changing fashions. And certainly we can quantify an interest in what people are wearing, and a sort of in some ways, a reading into what people are wearing as meaning certain things about them. And that, again, I think for me would come under the definition of fashion. So one of the famous things in ancient Athens that was constantly balancing this kind of tightrope walk between people wanting to, of course, do well for themselves, right? but obviously they lived in a democratic society of absolute political equality that wanted to pretend to a certain extent that also there was social and financial equality. And we see this in relation to their gravestones. So kind of at different periods of time, the Athenian democracy actually clamped down and said, right, you can't have a gravestone that takes more than a certain number of workmen, a certain number of days to build, because we don't want some people to have really big flashy ones and other people not, because then it will be clear that there's not social and financial equality. And they also banned too much investment, too much kind of elaborate funeral procession in order to achieve the same goal. And there was a certain element of that came to clothing as well. If you were a bit too ostentatious in your clothing, if you were wearing something that were perhaps copied a style from the East, from Persia, from that empire of luxuriousness and over-the-top sumptuous consumption, then you were saying something about your anti-democratic tendencies. If you wore clothing that ended up, for example, trailing on the floor and thus being used and abused too much, you weren't focused on keeping it long term and making it last as long as possible, then again, you were being overtly luxurious and thus in some ways anti-democratic. So one of the threats, one of the insults that you could throw at people in ancient Athens was to call them a tunic trailer. They trailed their tunics on the ground, little disrespect for the way they would thus get dirty and get worn out more quickly. Thus, they weren't a real democrat at heart because they weren't thinking about conserving their kind of clothes. Dawn's asking, wasn't it royalty only allowed to wear purple? Yes, certainly in the Roman Empire, towards the end of the Roman Empire, the period of time when the Roman emperors start to particularly convert to Christianity, purple, because it was such an expensive colour made out of those sea snails from Tyre, and they actually start issuing rules that only the emperors can wear it. It becomes imperial purple. They sort of corner the market in certain colours for themselves and their own. Absolutely. We get a whole sense of how certain fashions are then aligned with certain kinds of political stances. Certain fashions show your allegiance to and interest in certain parts of the ancient world. We get certain fashions that, certain commodities, particularly colours and materials that people try to reserve. Silk was another obvious one within the Roman world when it started coming in all the way from China into the Roman Mediterranean world, particularly from the 1st century BC and onwards. It was a massive fashion sort of desire. Everyone who was anyone back in Rome kind of wanted to have some of this silk. There was a street in Rome dedicated to silk selling, and kind of all the writers complain about the fact that this silk, and particularly a transparent variant of the silk, starts off as something that is being worn by women of ill repute, but quickly becomes a statement that even the kind of most upstanding Roman matrons, the mother figures of Roman society, want to wear, and they're kind of going, oh God, this is terrible that even now these great upstanding women are walking around in this transparent material naked. And then, heaven forbid, it actually becomes a fashion accessory for men to wear as well. And there's huge complaint about the fact that men are wearing this soft silk rather than coarse, hard-wearing cloths that speak again to their characters and personalities. If they're wearing coarse, hard-wearing material, then they are Roman men of severitas, auctoritas, dignitas, etc. But if they're wearing soft silks, then they are soft. Again, identifying with the East, in particular soft personalities, that means they might not be militarily so hardcore. Rome might be losing its edge. So, Mariam, short dresses are democratic. Well, I wouldn't quite go so far as to say that. Please don't quote me that I'm going around saying that short dresses are democratic. Short tunics, both for men and women. I'm not being gender specific here. Certainly, if you were in Athens, if you had your tunic trailing on the floor, you would be picked up for it, is all I will go so far as to say. And in the 1st centuries AD and 2nd centuries AD of the Roman Empire, switching back to silk for a second, there are a whole series of what are called sumptuary laws passed, trying to regulate what men and women, and particularly men, can and cannot wear, because the Roman state is so concerned about what the implications of wearing this type of material might be for the Roman character. So there we go. Mariam, thank you so much for your brilliant question. Absolutely fabulous. We have to quickly go and have a look at what's on, because then I want to get to 2 questions from Linda Montague, who has been patiently waiting for these questions to be answered as well. But I wanted to flag a couple of things to you. From BBC News, first of all, the Venus figurine uncovered in the Gloucester dig. An 1800-year-old figurine has been uncovered by archaeologists on a dig in the city centre. The statuette was discovered in Gloucestershire at the site of a new £100 million development called the Forum. Very appropriate. And of course, it's Venus, the goddess of love in Gloucestershire. Kind of Gloucester, as the heart of or many of our desires, of course. From The Independent as well, good news about Gladiator 2. I know you guys will be as excited about this as I am. Ridley Scott reveals the Gladiator sequel will be ready to go after he completes a movie about Napoleon. So I didn't realise this, but he's currently finishing up a movie about Napoleon Bonaparte. But he's quoted as saying, "I'm having Gladiator written now. So when I've done Napoleon, Gladiator will be ready to go." I hope, though, that he's not going to take some of the inspiration from a character such as Napoleon Bonaparte and push it back into Gladiator 2. There's quite enough pompous, kind of egotistical people walking around in ancient Rome without adding Napoleon into the mix. From Newsweek, a man has been creating ancient Roman recipes, including 4th century French fries and ketchup. Kind of a man. So Andrew Coletti, who's a food historian, is delving into the cuisines of long-forgotten cultures, brings them to life in his kitchen. And you can follow him on his TikTok page at Past the Flamingo. Coletti's from New York. He's whipped up medieval and Victorian dishes, but also those from ancient Greece, 12th century Morocco, 11th century Persia, and 13th century Egypt. Wow, you can get around, can't you, with the different results. So do have a look at Past the Flamingo. Alexis, you were in Bristol at the talk I did the other night. I'm so glad that you were able to get to go to that. It was great to be there, to be able to do an in-person talk to the Classical Association in Bristol earlier this week. And thank you all for your very kind comments afterwards. We'll be doing a talk also online to the Aberdeen Classical Association that you'll be able to tune into from anywhere around the world. So we'll put those links out. And then, of course, also we're doing the talk coming up in November for a Toronto-based drama group that, again, you can join into online for free, thinking particularly about Sophocles' Antigone. So do have a look for the links to those on the Facebook page. Now, talking about Antigone, this is absolutely brilliant. Antigone Journal. If Homer had my editor emailing the ancients. Now, this is something I think we should all get involved in. It's a new competition. Right? The Antigone Journal has launched this competition. Antigone Journal invites their readers to set about crafting their own polite email to an ancient. It may be a Greek poet, it may be a Roman emperor, a mythological heroine, or a character from comedy. But what would be your short, pithy email to an ancient? And it was this one to Homer here that was set up by Rosaria. Dear Homer, thank you for your patience as I looked over this draft of The Iliad. Love the title, by the way. I'm very impressed with all the work you've done here. Love Achilles' arc. Patroclus, so sad. Final chapter with Priam. You really nailed it. Just devastating. I think you're off to a tremendous start. Do keep up the good work. There we go. So you can send in through the Antigone Journal your own email. I think this is absolutely brilliant. Send in a few to us on the Facebook page as well, and we'll be putting those out there. Historic England is also going to offer virtual flights over ancient landscape. This would be, I'd love to see this. And in terms of things coming up and things to watch online, I'd recommend Peter Frankopan's inaugural lecture over, it's the inaugural Talia Potamios annual lecture series, which he's been doing about Greece beginnings, and that was on October the 7th in Athens, but you can watch it online. And then there's going to be 2 more lectures, Greece Legacies, Greece Futures, in March and May next year, all of which will also be online itself, which I think are definitely well worth getting into. We've talked about the History Hit podcast of A Lost Tomb of Alexander the Great, and of course Mary Beard is talking to The Rest is History to Tom and Dominic about her recent book, The 12 Lives of the Caesars, and Sophie Hay is also talking to History Extra about everything you wanted to know about Pompeii. So much going on. All the links through the Facebook page. Do get involved. Tracy, Maximus Gladiator's helmet from the film is being auctioned in London this November. like kind of, wouldn't we want to buy that? Anyone fancy chipping in? We can perhaps get it as a job lot together, and then we can pass it around this Facebook group one after the other, and sort of have a few goes wearing it at home. I know it's been a secret desire of mine to wear that. I'm sure it has been of yours as well. Right. 2 questions from Linda Montague that we want to get to. In an article in the Smithsonian Magazine, a new analysis reveals Vesuvius's victims' diverse diets. It talks about the fact that in the ancient Roman city of Herculaneum, men tended to consume more cereals and seafood, whereas women have been shown to have eaten more eggs, dairy, and meat. So do we know why that was? Thank you, Linda, for this. 50,000 plus for the helmet. Ouch. Okay, well, all right. I'm sure we can all dig in. We can dig deep for this. We can dig deep. It's definitely worth it, right? Let's kind of raid that piggy bank, as Alexis says. So this is really interesting, isn't it, this research? Because you would think about meat as being the more expensive item, fish perhaps being in the less expensive item. So quite odd that women are being given the meat and men the fish in the traditional setup of the ancient world, of course, whereas sadly we know all too often men got prioritized over women. But it was, in fact, we think, for sort of 2 main reasons that we're seeing this opposite picture. One is that men are going to be more directly involved normally in the fishing industry, the fishing trade. They're going to be the ones actually going out there, catching the stuff, etc., thus having more easy and direct access to being able to consume it than women. But actually, fish tended to be the more expensive thing in the ancient world compared to meat. Neither were necessarily particularly frequent. Of course, it depended where you were in the ancient world and how close to the coast you were. But even in a place like Athens, with its own port and its own kind of major fishing industry, etc., fish is actually where you see the most differentiation in terms of items of luxury consumption. So again, we have those great texts that tell us about if you liked and ate particular kinds of fish, that said things about you in terms of your politics, whether you were a pro-democrat or an anti-democrat, if you had a liking for particular kinds of luxurious and expensive fish. And it seems the case here is same here in Herculaneum and Pompeii. We're close to the sea, so you would have thought very accessible, but actually fish seems to have been the more expensive option. So not only were men more likely to be involved in the fishing trade and in the fishing industry, but actually they were, as ever, claiming their superiority by eating the more expensive stuff, leaving the less expensive meat from the land to be consumed by women. So this is kind of really interesting understanding of kind of how things get changed around a little bit kind of within antiquity. And then Linda's a second question. We've just got time to get this in. Ancient Egypt treated people with disabilities and deformities with much more respect and reverence, and thought that the gods had made them special, with the idea being that the gods had made them special. How did the ancient Greek and Roman societies treat their disabled populations? So this is, again, a really interesting question, and something that, again, is only becoming recently a topic and a focus of debate. And this is coming out of kind of an initial area of interest, which is particularly to do with the statuary surviving from the Hellenistic world, so period post the death of Alexander the Great, all the way through to the rise of the Emperor Augustus in the Roman world, in which there's a whole vein of little statuettes that are created, and you can see some in the British Museum, and you see some in a number of museums, of course, around the world, of what we would call people with disabilities and deformities that are being portrayed in what has often been identified as quite disparaging formats. So we're seeing small statuettes of hunchbacks or of characters with other kinds of deformities. And these have not been well understood and are still not particularly well understood. Some people have argued that they are some kind of amulet to wear to actually ward off evil from happening to you, but kind of it's very unclear exactly what these are doing. But the scholarly area and research now has started to broaden out to show that it is simply not as clear-cut a picture as disparaging those with disabilities and deformities as we might first imagine from just looking at these sculptures. And that's come from a number of different angles. Firstly, just imagining what the native population of the ancient Greek and Roman worlds would actually have been like, given their diet, given their access to non-clean water, the spread of disease, the fact that warfare was such a constant part of their lives, and thus many would have sustained injuries that would have given them disabilities and deformities through life if they hadn't had them from birth. And in fact, we must imagine a population where the vast majority actually have some kind of disability or deformity or problem that's come from malnutrition or illness through the course of their lives. And so this was a much more normal and indeed in certain cases respected. And then you get the issue of a god like Hephaestus. And of course, Hephaestus is famously talked about within the Iliad as himself being disabled with a lame leg, and yet he's a god. And there's lots of different mythological descriptions of how he gets that deformity, whether he's born with it or whether he's given it through accident. But it's clear that it is not simply a case of people with deformities and disabilities being thought of as any less, in some cases being honoured and being given a whole series of other kind of special powers, if you like, in a way, because of and in addition to their deformities and disabilities. So it's a really interesting and developing area, Linda. Thank you so much indeed for your question. We are out of time. Time has run away with us. Alexis is asking, could it be that fish would be quicker, easier to prepare and cook than meat? Interesting, yeah, really interesting point there as well, isn't it? Something certainly that could allow people who are in the trade to be availing themselves of fish as well, much more quickly as well than meat. But obviously as well, kind of meat tends to come into people's lives at more community gatherings, because you're unlikely as an individual family to sort of raise an oxen because of the amount of effort and time and feeding that it requires to get that oxen up to a point in its life when it can be slaughtered and eaten. So these, particularly in the Greek world, these kinds of big animal feasts tend to come in at big religious festivals when a city or a community has decided to raise all these animals in order to then provide at a certain point in time. So thank you for that, Alexis. Thank you, Mark. That's very kind of you indeed. We are out of time. When are we meeting next? I have a note here. The 4th of November, 5 p.m. on the 4th of November. I hope you can join us all then. It would be fantastic to see you. And do keep your questions coming in. Please, please, please. Either now, live, or kind of through the Gmail address, michaelscottacademic@gmail.com, or through the Facebook page, and we will get round to answering some more. There's a cracker that I didn't get round to again, that I was desperate to get round to, which was from Leanne Wemben Price, that we will answer. Leanne, I promise you, first off next time, talking about midsummer and how did different ancient cultures celebrate midsummer. We're sadly a little bit away from midsummer now, but we can all remember it as we think about it on the 4th of November. Until then, stay safe, look after yourselves, and we'll see you on the 4th of November. Take care.